It is not hyperbole to say that Donald Trump's big ol' red, white, and yeehaw 4th of July extravaganza, America's 250th birthday yesterday, that Donald Trump has been building toward for the entirety of his second term, it could not have gone worse. It couldn't have gone worse if Joe Biden's communist Antifa, as they like to call us now, I guess, had planned it themselves. Donald Trump's strongman spectacle, the record-breaking fireworks, the flyovers wasting our tax dollars in broad daylight, the whole thing designed to make him look like the most powerful man who had ever lived, was one of the most impressive disasters we've ever seen in American history. First of all, the fair was already a humiliation ritual before we even got to the weekend festivities. People literally collapsed from heat exhaustion while standing in line for one single Ferris wheel. Just one Ferris wheel at the Great American State Fair. I don't really know if that works. The food, of course, was scarce and overpriced. The decorations, cheap and fake. The iced coffees were watered down. Trader Joe's cold brews sold for $10 each. And literally, almost nobody actually showed up. Then the fair had to be shut down on Friday, of course, because of the intense heat, possibly due to Mitch McConnell itching his way down to the gates of hell. They had to open up for Mitch, and, of course, it's a slow walk for the turtle. And then they had to push back the Saturday opening 2 hours because it still was too dangerous to let people inside. I'm laughing while I say this. I mean, truly, how could it get any worse? Well, of course, it's Donald Trump. So it did. The National Independence Day Parade, the one everybody had been planning for. Sorry, I'm laughing again. It got canceled entirely. Not by protesters, not by the Democrats, but by brutal heat, hitting somewhere between 110 and 115 degrees. And then, because this is all a clear, unmistakable sign from God, the heat broke into a severe thunderstorm right as Donald Trump was about to take the stage for his big speech before the record-setting fireworks show, forcing them to evacuate the entire National Mall. I just need to take a second to laugh. Tens of thousands of people told to go and hide in the Department of Commerce and the IRS building. And by the way, the funniest thing is just how many people refused to evacuate, arguing with cops and fighting their way back to the all-metal stage in the middle of a thunderstorm just for dear leader, as if Trump would put himself in the slightest bit of danger for these people. He would never, which is what makes what happened next so ridiculous. Trump called into the Fox propaganda outlet and compared himself to the brave men who stormed the beaches of Normandy for being willing to, I'm going to check my notes here, speak after a storm. That's what made Donald Trump so brave. And the speech, by the way, it was short, but it proved as much as anything else lately that Donald Trump, the man screaming about communism who fell asleep during the fireworks show, is sundowning. Yes, by the way, you heard me correctly. He fell asleep during his own fireworks show, and his stupid supporters ate it up. Just take a look at this photo. The man is passed out. And I'm sure, though, Carolyn Levitt is just going to tell us that it was maybe an extended blink. And while all of that chaos was going on and Donald Trump's second dumbest fans desperately clamored to see him speak, hundreds of mass members of a neo-Nazi group called Patriot Front, who hold the honor of Donald Trump's number one dumbest fans, of course, they marched through the streets of D.C., carrying some American flags, but mostly Confederate flags, most of them upside down, chanting, "Reclaim America," because nothing says we love America like neo-Nazis hoisting the flag of the Confederacy. Do you guys know anything about history? But both of these groups declared war on America and lost in historical humiliation. Hopefully that's also a sign for the future. And in case you're curious which side of the humiliation the local cops are on, this Nazi hate march resulted in 0 arrests. Little disappointing, guys. DC police put out a statement saying they were, quote, tracking First Amendment activities. What are we doing here? Because some of those who burn crosses are, I guess, the same who work for the forces. And as if the heat and the storms and the Nazis weren't enough, Donald Trump topped the whole day off by literally poisoning the air. You heard me correctly. His final act of arrogance of the night was firing close to 1 million fireworks into the sky, which is 120 times the size of a normal show. And even the government's own internal documents, not us, not the liberal propagandists as we will be called, but the National Park Service, warned that it could push pollution in downtown DC to hazardous levels, with smoke thick enough to match Beijing, China on a bad day. A projection of PM 2.5 exceeding 2,000 micrograms per cubic meter. Now, I'm not a public health expert. None of that sounds good. But the public health experts, they weighed in. They literally warned people to wear N95, go back to COVID masks today in DC. That's how bad Trump poisoned the air, just so people would pay attention to him. This man is a malignant narcissist. It is truly crazy. Everything that could have gone wrong on that day, it went wrong. And it went wrong in a way that really reads like an omen. The rain is an opportunity for rebirth. Something new, America, to declare our independence from that bullshit, from that king, from those losers who marched through the street. That is the opportunity that we have. It is a new day, and it is going to take all of us. And it is certainly going to take, I'm hoping so, 3 people who will be joining me today on the show. We have Governor Gavin Newsom, who is an enemy of Donald Trump's state. They're going after him. We're going to talk all about it. Someone who will soon rise atop the ranks of Donald Trump's list of people to yell at on Truth Social, Minnesota Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, who is going to be talking to me about her Senate race, and we're going to be keeping it pretty Minnesota nice. And of course, I'm very excited to welcome my good friend Jim Acosta, who has been out there in the field, so you have probably been watching his work. But it is all happening right now, as it always does, with you, with me, with our 3 great guests. And of course, it's happening on Sunday. Governor Gavin Newsom, thank you so much for joining me on Sunday.
It's good to be with you. Good to be with you on a Sunday. I like it.
This is
Sunday shows.
This is the time to do it. And it's time for a little bit of bragging to start. We got a lot to cover, but I want to give you the opportunity to brag on your state a little bit, because Donald Trump, the goons in the MAGA media are always saying that California is the liberal hellhole and it's terrible. But you're hitting record lows on crime right now. Can you just go ahead and brag on your state a bit?
Well, it's been it was quite a week, Jack. We balanced our budget, not just this year, but for an additional year. So the next governor, I didn't try to get out of Dodge at the end of my term. The next governor is going to enjoy a 2-year balanced budget with surpluses, close to $40 billion in reserves. We paid down $15 billion of pensions. Those are the fiscal conservatives. At the same time, we fully implemented universal preschool. We have over 170,000 kids now in universal preschool. We did 130,000 subsidized childcare slots. When people talk about childcare, they should be talking about California at a scale and scope no other state in America has achieved. 2 free school meals. We were the first state in America to do that. Now we're talking about the quality of the food and farm to school and looking at making sure we have healthy choices for our kids. After school for all, summer school for all, fully scaled and implemented. 5.9% uninsured rate compared to Texas, 16.7 in healthcare. Among the lowest uninsured rates in America, because the biggest healthcare expansions in America. Balanced that budget, did all of those things, progressive investments. And to your question, we've seen crime rates now below 2019 levels. Homicide, the lowest ever recorded in California. Since 1966, we weren't recording with modern data. So lowest homicide rates ever in every single crime category. We're below 2019 levels. Violent crime went down 10.2% last year. And you could compare that, and I'll close, to all those red states.
Please do.
Texas, higher property crime than California. Texas, higher homicide rates. Let me be fair, because I don't want to cast aspersion on red states like Louisiana or places like Arkansas. How about Tennessee? Tennessee gets no attention on the issue of their crime rates. Tennessee has a 24.1% higher violent crime rate than the state of California. All those states I mentioned, higher crime rates than states like California. So I make the point to reinforce a bigger point, and that is most folks don't know these things. They don't know what's happening in blue states. They don't know that the murder state the problems with murder in this country are red state problems. And we need to communicate that more forcefully, much more clearly.
Yeah, you've always done a great job and came up with the term the donor state a little while ago that I really love, making it very clear who is delivering to who, right? What this, lopsided nature of who is performing and who isn't is. But Donald Trump clearly saw that crime was hitting record lows in California, and he thought he would make some up with accusations that they're not even substantive. We don't really even know what they are against you and your family. It's just kind of all a mirage, the optics. That's what Trump loves. How do you think that this weaponization, this latest example of weaponization, is going to play out?
Well, I don't know how it plays out, but it's very real, man. When it's not an abstract, it's not about someone else. Mm-hmm. When it's about your family, he's tried to come after me, and I made this point. You want a fair game with me? This guy's, he wanted call for my arrest. People forget that. Wasn't that long ago he called for my arrest. He's obsessed with me, new scum. Every other rally, it's a applause line to come after the governor of California. He's tried. Trust me when I say this. For well over a year, he's tried in ways that, one day may become more known. But when he started going after, because he couldn't figure it out with me, friends and family, that was a line that's crossed from my perspective. All the lines were crossed, but I was willing to accept and absorb a certain amount because, I understand what's going on in this country. But that was a different thing, man. And that's why I made it public.
And it's interesting given the fact that Trump and his kids right now, who are stealing from us to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars in government contracts. You're seeing Ivanka be protested by entire nations for her new little Epstein Island knockoff. And then they claim that we're just Trump's kids and you're going after us because we're kids, but they are fully grown adults. What do you make of the Trump family corruption and the fact that that's not really talked about, but then he still feels so comfortable going after your family?
Well, I don't, how much time do we have? I mean, I'm serious. I mean, now that we saw a week ago, not a $400 million Qatari plane. Remember, there was almost $950 million in the Pentagon budget to retrofit that plane. That will be his personal plane that he was, quote unquote, gifted by the Qatari government. That's just a symbolic example of the corruption. We could talk about the meme coins. We could talk about Melania's, not just Trump's. We could talk about the great grift, this corruption story. The Trump administration is a corruption story. It's the one thing that connects every dot. And every other week, we learn about, as you suggest, not just Donald Trump's corruption. And I'm not talking about the $100,000 watches. I'm not talking about the guitars that he's selling that you didn't even know about, or the Bibles or the sneakers. I'm not talking about all that. I'm talking about what's happening substantively with these kids and these investments and the Pentagon contracts they're receiving on rare earth minerals and drone companies and all the stuff that's happening with Kushner family, the Witkoff family, the Board of Peace, which is about getting a piece of the Middle East, which talk about the UAE and high-valued chips where they're getting a piece of our national security, where the Biden administration held off. But as long as you can get a deal done with the UAE on the private family businesses, then all of a sudden national security becomes less of an important talking point. Or how about the tariff relief in places like Vietnam for the golf courses and the development deals and the dozen other countries that he's doing business in? How about all the corruption as it relates to just all the self-dealing with his resorts and with all of his assets here that the Secret Service and taxpayers are subsidizing and directing the G7 investments consistently, and the emollients issues across the spectrum every day, or just the day trading literally behind the Oval Office desk, or showing up in your calendar and a company that you just invested in because you know that stock's going to pop because you're going to promote it the next day. All of this happening, this open sewage system. You talk about draining the swamp. He gave it a presidential suite with gold leaf. And so here we are, and guys like Governor Walz had to spend over $1 million in criminal defense to have that thrown out. People are being targeted on his list. Their families are being torn asunder. And you're seeing this gross corruption at a scale and scope never in modern American history. This is stuff I don't even imagine even exists at this scale. And a year and a half in, even Putin's Russia or Kim Jong-un's North Korea. I mean it, at this scale, this quickly in the second term. He's just winding up. So forgive the long-windedness.
But you're
it's
right.
Serious stuff. Serious damn stuff, man.
I'm assuming you guys haven't chatted about it. When was the last time he texted you? Because we know that he's been really, Trump's bisexuality has come out a lot lately. He's talking about dudes' legs. You know, he thinks you're handsome. He thinks Wes Moore is handsome, that Zoran is handsome. When was the last time y'all talked?
We had a Pride Day tweet the other day at, forgive me, you've reminded me of, you don't know what I'm talking about. People should Google it. We haven't talked in a while. And, that's a good thing. The last conversation we had was 19 minutes. And I provided, because of our friends in Congress, I provided some detailed notes of that for purposes of transparency. Those notes do not make Trump's case. Let's just leave it at that. And so
his mental case?
I think he's a little more hesitant to want to reach out to me than he was in the past. So we haven't had that opportunity in some time. And I say this, and you know this because I've told you this privately, not just publicly. First term with Trump, I talked to him pretty consistently. I had an open hand, not a closed fist, as it relates to dealing with COVID and wildfires, droughts, and issues. Second term, I tried to do the same thing until he federalized the National Guard, sought 4,000 National Guard in LA, 700 active duty Marines in Los Angeles, crossed so many damn red lines, and now, of course, going after my family because he's a coward and try to take my family down. No interest in that conversation.
Do you think he's also a little worried, or maybe his handlers are? You talked about having that transcript of anything that he says being made public. Recently the White House put together a media offenders list with, creators mostly talking about Donald Trump's mental decline. You don't really see that from the mainstream media as much as you're seeing, more consolidation of media by Donald Trump's friends, whether it be, TikTok, whether it be, CBS. Do you think that those things are kind of intertwined, this media hesitancy to talk about Trump's health as the White House covers it up?
Of course. By the way, that's a hell of a thing. And I know you've been talking about it, and I appreciate you bringing it up. I need to talk about this more.
Please.
You guys ended up on a damn hit list. I mean, this is stuff you can't make this up. There's a list of folks, Brian, Tyler, all you guys ended up on this damn list, as if you're enemies of the state because you believe in journalism. You believe in accountability and transparency. I mean, the whole thing, you see these press conferences in the Oval Office, you maybe have one or two reasonable reporters, they ask a question, there's no chance for a follow-up, and then it's 7 sycophants from news outlets that are just, Mr. Trump, this is, you're such a extraordinary man. You look quite handsome. You look like you've lost weight. Is that because you are negotiating Medicaid Part D with GLP-1s because of your extraordinary work to get pharmaceutical prices down? Tell us more, Mr. President. I mean, it's just embarrassing. It's an embarrassment. And so what we have to do is call it out. I have to talk more about this. I appreciate you even bringing that up. But yeah, look, it's not what is said. It's what's not said. It's the chill in the newsrooms.
Yeah. What worries you most, though?
That are spiked, man. Segments are spiked.
What worries you most, though, about the health issues, that like the falling asleep? Like, it's obviously a bit of a joke that our president is such a joke that he falls asleep, but there's real implications. Like, what worries you most? You've talked on the phone with him when he doesn't remember your conversations, or he's talking about raking and he's just living a different world. What worries you most about his health decline?
Well, I mean, I saw Congressman Lieu, talk about this very substantively and soberly the other day in a legitimate way of asking, legitimately wanting to ask some basic questions. But yeah, you're right. It's not just the mockumentary side of this. It's not just, the SNL skit version of this. Oh, he's falling asleep, the memes around this. You're right. I said this a year and a half ago when I had a chilling conversation where I'm like, he's repeating himself. And I was like, I said, he's like a pitcher that's lost 10, 15, 20 miles an hour on his fastball. And then the next time I talked to him, he's repeating himself. And I'm like, no, I'm being too generous. I don't think it's just the arms lost a little bit. There's something else missing here. And if it were anyone else, or frankly, had we not had the contract, I think the Biden stuff makes people a little more careful, cautious of playing a little bit of that politics around this and left versus right. And so I think he's graded now on a new curve. And your point is we need to get around the curve and try to, I think, look behind the curtain a little bit here. What the hell is going on in terms of his cognitive health? And obviously, look, that's a real life thing. That's sober.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's not a joke. It's real
serious stuff. Yeah, that gets into judgment. It gets into Iran. It gets into all the BS. I mean, the fact that the fact that he might actually believe what he's saying about things that are just by definition untrue, and demonstrably so. And so it's not just spin. It's not just delusion. It may be something more deeply rooted, more deeply concerning.
Yeah, which is why I think the appetite has expanded so much for that new generation of leaders, the people who are going against the establishment. We've seen that a lot recently with a lot of big wins, a lot of big victories over the establishment for some more progressive candidates across the country. Of course, Zohran Mamdani has kind of been really the leader of that all. A lot of people would say that he's maybe the leader of our party right now. I know I asked the Trump, when was the last time you talked, but you told me last time when we were talking about your book, actually, which is, bestseller. You did a great job on that one. But you said that you and Zohran have been texting a little bit. What have y'all been talking about as of recently?
Well, I got to be careful. He's, by the way, no one more tight-lipped than Mayor Mamdani when it comes to the question, when was the last time you talked to Donald Trump? And then he has a magnificent way of never answering that question. I applaud it. I wasn't as successful with you in terms of answering that question. But no, I of course, unsurprisingly, I say of course, because it shouldn't be a surprise after his success, and it was rather remarkable success. You have to, I mean, you could be his biggest critic. You had to acknowledge his success on election night, and certainly reached out and texted him. And look, I'm very mindful. There was an interesting piece I had on my podcast, Hunter Biden on, was, Hunter's interesting on so many levels, and I've known him for years and years. And I'm really, just on a personal level, I'm so pleased that he's doing as well as he is. But I thought he had a really interesting assessment of the election the day after, saying, wake up, Democrats. It wasn't just the anti-establishment. It wasn't just on the policy side. There's also, he made a point about just authenticity, man. Yeah. Just tonality, calling balls and strikes, just clarity, conviction, a focus on wages, a focus on lowering costs. But laser focus on things that actually really matter. And I think if there's any lesson, it's just a reminder that this guy figured it out a year ago plus, and his influence in terms of that continues to grow. And it certainly grew the other day during the election.
Well, then what do you make of, some Democrats who are saying, more the establishment type, maybe the more corporate Democrat wing, saying that, these DSA candidates, these progressives are a threat to the Democratic Party or like to the American way of life? Yeah, they've just kind of got out over their skis with that. What do you make of just kind of that outlandish response?
And I reject it, but let me also tell you why. I don't just reject it from sort of a situational framework. Forgive me, you're talking to someone who, forgive me, the establishment, here I am looking, people are like, oh, you're talking about the establishment, this Newsom guy, I can't believe Jack's, I get all that, but I also get all that. I've lived this. I come from San Francisco. I want to remind folks, the right wing doesn't need to be reminded, but some folks watching me. I ran against the Green Party. I was in a runoff for mayor of San Francisco against a remarkably talented young man who has talked in many of the terms that are very familiar to me, Democratic Socialist, but he was a member of the Green Party. After he lost for mayor, he was Ralph Nader's vice presidential nominee, which is just interesting. So I understand this politics. Progressives in San Francisco going back decades, the progressive they're very familiar. I govern in that environment. And of course, I'm in, California, and there's aspects of that represented here at the state level. So this is all familiar, and it's very healthy. I don't think it's unhealthy. So I completely reject this notion. And look, I'm for addition, not subtraction. The Democratic Party needs to be in the addition business if we're going to get back into the majority. Yeah, we need to get our base out there. We got to turn out, but we also need to be, and I'm not offended by this notion of a big tent. And I think it's important, though, that big tent is a big tent, because there's folks, on this side that don't want folks on that. I think we'd be better off to look at the things that bind us together, the things we have in common. And I know the purity, it's going to get tougher and tougher in the next few years. but I am enthusiastic about the success and the energy and the vibrancy that's happening at the grassroots in this country. I think it's a healthy damn thing.
Well, you brought up one of those grassroots policies, I think, which is, maybe just completely just a popular policy, I think, so overwhelming support in the Democratic Party, when you said you think that Medicare for all is inevitable, right? When you were talking with our friend Brian Tyler Cohen, a lot of people were saying that this was like maybe you doing one of those feeling out the winds.
Give me a break. I've been doing more. There's not a human being. I'm just saying with love. You're talking to the guy as mayor of San Francisco that was the only mayor in America that delivered on universal health care, regardless of pre-existing condition, ability to pay, and your immigration status. Took a lot of heat from my own party on that. Said I would do that as governor of California at scale. You're talking to one governor here, 5.9% uninsured rate. The biggest healthcare expansions in U.S. history. No one comes close, not just on physical health, but mental health. $6.38 billion new bond that just passed. Across the board, reforms that we would only dream of. $11, not subsidized, $11 insulin delivered on that. Diapers that are free. You're talking to someone with respect that has real receipts on healthcare, and I'll challenge any Democrat out there. I'd love to compare and contrast. And I've been pursuing and I've been pushing this 1115 waivers, 1332 waivers. You want me to go on about CalAIM. You want to talk about whole person care. You want about integrating Medicaid system, our Medi-Cal system, and bringing housing into that component and the waivers I got from the Biden administration. This is what this has been cause of my life. And I've said forever, going back to my first days as mayor, and certainly when I was running for governor, that I believe that Medicare for all, this notion, single payer broadly, is inevitable in this country because it's bankrupting this country. Mm-hmm. Not just public sector, but the private sector as well. And it's not delivering for folks. And I get the stress around subsidizing insurance companies, the stress around Obamacare and the subsidies. We've got to lower costs, not just subsidize the inefficiency in the system. The question is, Jack, a hard one, because the difference between me and a lot of people is I'm not in the legislature. I'm not in a think tank. I have to be accountable to policy and decisions and look the voters in the eyes the next day. And as a practitioner in this space that's done more than any other state in country, I'm just telling you the challenge of getting there is not insignificant. So I do think it's inevitable. But how do you create the framework where you can have a system where people with their health insurance, which is a large percentage of people that may be unhappy with it, but it's comfortable. How do you shift away from that system and move that into a different direction? That's the hard part. It's the hard part called governing. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's inevitable. That's something I've been saying for years and years and years, like the billionaire's tax. All of a sudden people say, wow, Newsom just comes out with an alternative. Well, where have you been? I mean, I've been saying not at the state level. I've been saying at the national level for years. And I could show you 5 videos and Q&As where I've said it. People think, wow, now he's just come out of nowhere with it. So with respect to folks, again, maybe I've been around establishment. I've got a lot of war wounds on this, but I also have a lot of success in this space. And I'm pretty damn proud of it.
Well, you said that you would debate any Democrat. Contrast that. You said last week that maybe you're considering 2028. You don't need to make that announcement right now, but I look forward to having you back. I was about to,
but I was going to do it. It's fine. You don't want me to say anything. I'm good, Jack. I'm good. We're good. I respect you too much to. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'll indulge you by not saying a word.
We'll get it next time. Governor Gavin Newsom, thank you so much for joining me on Sunday.
Thanks for having me.
Always fantastic talking to Governor Gavin Newsom. Now, this is a perfect place to talk about today's sponsor, and one that I truly love. And I genuinely mean it when I say they're unusually relevant to this story because it's ground news. They exist to be a helpful tool because in so many ways, the media is broken. Ground news was built because you can't just watch the news on TV anymore and trust what you're getting. Your perception is being actively shaped. Some stories stories get amplified while other stories get buried. Framing gets twisted and the entire narrative gets constructed by which half of the country decides to cover something and which half ignores it. Ground News polls and compares news from over 50,000 outlets, and it shows you everything: who's covering what, how they're spinning it, who's gone conspicuously silent, it's usually Fox, bias ratings, headline comparisons, reliability scores, funding, and ownership transparency. And the feature that I keep coming back to, and y'all know this because I come back to it time and time again, is the blind spot feed, because it exposes stories getting wall-to-wall coverage on one side while being completely ignored on the other. That is so important. So check it out at ground.news/JackC. Like this story where Donald Trump told reporters that he, quote, loves inflation. Ground News shows me this is getting completely ignored by the right. While this one on Mayor Mamdani politely asking New Yorkers to make sure that they turn down their AC because we don't want a blackout, it's getting less coverage on the left. Less of a story. This is exactly why this tool exists and one of the many reasons I'm such a big fan of Ground News. I'm on the Vantage plan and I check it daily. With my link, you can get 40% off at ground.news/JackC or scan the QR code. I use it all the time and couldn't recommend it more. I also couldn't recommend more the conversation that I'm excited to have with Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, someone who is running for the United States Senate right now in Minnesota. Like I said, couldn't recommend that campaign anymore, but I know we're going to talk all about why. Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, thank you so much for joining me on Sunday.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here with you.
Now, you have one of the hottest and most important primaries, Senate primaries happening in your state right now. And I think in the context of the victories that we've seen for progressives all across the country, it is starting to get a lot more attention. What has been your takeaway from victories in Colorado, in New York City, and really all across the country for progressive candidates?
I mean, I think what it tells us is that people are ready for big, bold change. They are sick and tired of the status quo. They are over what Washington, D.C. has been offering us. And I think, what I hear over and over again is folks are, know that we are here, of course, because of Donald Trump, but we are also here because there's actually too many Democrats who've been weak in this moment, who've been unwilling to stand up to the folks, frankly, corporate PACs, APAC, health insurance companies, the people who have, I think, in many ways, caused the conditions that we are faced with in this country right now, and they're looking for fighters.
I want to talk about APAC spending in your race specifically, because there's a lot of it for those that aren't aware. But APAC has started to do this interesting but unsurprising thing where they're running attack ads or, promotional ads or whatever it may be that do not reference Israel, that just don't talk about it. They know the issue is deeply unpopular. They know they can't even say APAC in their ad. Do you think at this point, although the spending is huge, and I'd love for you to get into those numbers against you and for your opponent, do you think it's kind of like doing more harm than good at this point to be like taking this money that everyone knows is so damaging to our politics?
I mean, what I think people know is that they understand that big money in our politics is a problem. And I think people are becoming just hyper aware of that. I don't take APAC money because my values are not aligned with APAC. I think, this entity has essentially been just pushing Benjamin Netanyahu's agenda. And we are at a time when I think people are pretty clear that we absolutely need to make sure, right, that we have, children of Israel who can live in peace and not worry about, right, fleeing to bomb shelters in the middle of the night. But we need to make sure that Palestinians have self-determination. And we need to make sure, right, that we are clear about this genocide in Gaza and the report that just came out. Talking about tens of thousands of children, Palestinian children, who've been killed. That is a place where I know that AIPAC has one candidate in this race, and it's Congresswoman Craig, right, who has a history of standing with them. She was one of 14 Democrats total and the only Minnesota Democrat who voted to send 2,000-pound bombs to Benjamin Netanyahu while President Biden was working towards a pause. So I think people are becoming more aware of this spending. And, I think it's important that we tell the truth about where these dollars are coming from, right? In our race right now, we're being outspent 10-1 because there is $11 million that has come into this race in corporate PACs, in these dark money groups that don't have to disclose where their money comes from and can run ad after ad after ad that are completely misleading. I think people deserve better than that. And I think that also is starting to backfire. Folks don't like it.
Yeah, nobody wants to be lied to, especially by giant dark money interests. AIPAC's not the only one. The crypto industry was just some of the fucking worst people in the entire planet. If you thought the Winklevoss twins in the Facebook movie, The Social Network, were bad, they've gotten even worse. Okay, Armie Hammer is also. I don't know if he's involved. He's got his own past. We don't need to talk about that. I don't need your comments on Armie Hammer for this campaign. But crypto's gotten heavily involved, unless you have them. They've gotten heavily involved in this race as well. And this comes as Donald Trump's latest financial disclosure, which I think is kind of funny to call it a financial disclosure when I don't think we can trust anything that Donald Trump, quote unquote, discloses. But what we know right now is that he made billions off of crypto, and he made them by just stealing from his supporters, which is kind of funny. What did you make of Donald Trump's recent financial disclosure?
I mean, it is just grifting grifter, right? In chief, that's, that is what we have. And I think, the crypto industry, essentially asked for their dream bill. They got it, right? The Genius Act. And that is what has allowed Donald Trump to make at least, right, $1.4 billion in cryptocurrency, right? And folks who have invested in Donald Trump's, crypto coin have lost significant amounts of money. And I think that's also a place where crypto is coming in big in this race, right? Like they spent $1 million to get Congresswoman Craig elected in 2024, and she turned right around and voted for their June bill that has allowed Donald Trump to enrich himself to the tune of $1.4 billion at least. And I just think, it is incredibly important that we are so clear that there has to be regulations, guidelines, and that this is how the president is enriching himself in the White House, and we should not be supporting that.
It's a literal direct transfer of wealth. I know we talk about these things in that way when we're talking about the control that oligarchs have over our economy and our government. But with Donald Trump's crypto coin, there was the graph where it was like you start here and then the Trump supporters lose that much and then the Trump family makes this much. It is that literal direct transfer. I know that, crypto spending is something that, rightfully animates people. I don't know if as an issue it maybe does. What are the issues though on the ground that you are hearing most about right now? Obviously, it was probably a lot of conversation around ICE, which I want to talk about later. But right now, what are people's biggest focus in Minnesota?
Sure. I would say crypto comes up in the context of the fact that these are folks who are benefiting from things being this way, right, at the expense of regular people. The number one thing that I hear from people is that they are ready for Medicare for all. Yeah. This is the thing that I think can make a tremendous difference just in people's overall quality of life, the money that they can keep in their pockets, but also feels like a place where it's no longer a fringe policy. It is what people actually need, and something that I think every single Democrat should be fighting for. We are done nibbling around the edges and on our way to Medicare for all. We should get rid of prior authorization, and the healthcare your doctors prescribe should be the care that you actually receive. The other thing that I hear about all the time is just generally getting big money out of our politics. People understand that Citizens United has completely disrupted and caused the conditions where the folks at the very, very top, the wealthiest people in this country, are doing incredibly well because they can influence our elections through, incredible amounts of money. And I think folks understand that. So they're ready to get big money out of politics. I'm the only candidate in this race who's endorsed by End Citizens United because I'm not taking a dime of corporate PAC money. I want to be beholden only to Minnesotans. And I don't think, crypto, health insurance companies, AI, billionaires should have more of a say over the voters in our state. So that's, those are some of the issues that we hear about all the time. And then people are just fired up. They are just ready to go and are completely engaged. And sometimes I think, of course, we've seen all these other primaries across the country that have been getting a lot of attention. I'm grateful that you're focused on Minnesota because I actually think the future of the Democratic Party goes right through Minnesota. There's a choice between, a corporate Democrat who is essentially fueled by, these special interests, or you've got, a progressive fighter who's been doing this work for a really long time, right, in partnership with Minnesotans. That's the choice.
Do you think that national narrative is breaking through, or people coming up and asking you and talking about or being excited by, the Graham Plattner or the Claire Valdez, the Daria Liza, people who are winning right now? Is that something that more people are kind of starting their conversations by saying, like, look what's happening nationally? And do you think that has an influence, or is it kind of just the understanding of what people know the state wants itself?
I mean, I think those things are connected. I think that people are like, I am excited that there is, a group of new leaders who are coming, into our politics and into Washington, D.C. And that's what's getting people, I think, pumped up and plugged in. Of course, right, the occupation of ICE here in our streets, the loss of 2 Minnesotans, and like that we are still recovering from that. I think sometimes, it feels like the national news cycle has moved on. We are still here. And it is so apparent that the terrorization of our people, the loss of life, and I think the impact on our children is still very heavy and very present. And that also, I think, is a pretty considerable motivator for people for being involved, starting with their precinct caucuses, to organizing in partnership with us on the ground as we head into the primary, where we're on track to knock 100,000 doors by July 15th.
Well, it was certainly motivating for one member of the House, a Republican. What was your reaction to this tweet? One of the craziest things I've ever seen. Tom Emmer said, always great. And it's a photo, a nice big hug. Always great to see my friend and fellow Minnesotan, Angie Craig, around the halls of Congress. She's one of the few Democrats who's willing to work across the aisle to get important legislation like the Laken-Riley Act across the finish line. We will miss you around here, Angie. What was your reaction to that post?
I think that, Tom Emmer is a master in trolling, but I also think he is pretty ignorant right now. I mean, because I assume that many of, your viewers also know that he said horrific things about immigrants in Minnesota and Somali immigrants in particular just last week. So I know that Tom Emmer is not anyone I am interested in hugging, frankly. And he certainly would not be thanking me for my support of a bill, the Laken-Riley Act, which strips immigrants of due process and allows for indefinite detention of adults and children, which I think was absolutely the policy that gave the green light to Donald Trump to terrorize our people. And the reality is, my primary opponent, Congresswoman Craig, supported the Laken Riley Act. She 3 days into the second Trump administration, voted 10 toes down for Donald Trump's immigration bill. And now Minnesotans have had to deal with the consequences of that vote. And so I think Tom Emmer has a lot of work to do. But I also think, Congresswoman Craig, up until she decided to run for the U.S. Senate, had on her website that she was proud of the fact that she voted with Tom Emmer 45% of the time. That is nothing to be proud of. And, I think she gets that now since she took it off her website. But that is, her history. She has voted with Donald Trump more than any other Minnesota Democrats, hugging Tom Emmer. And, we deserve a real Democrat to represent us in the Senate, not just someone who cosplays a Democrat when it's convenient for her.
Obviously, the answer to this question, I don't think is going to be anything similar to like walking back or trying to hide a vote for the Laken Riley Act. But what do you think you have learned or maybe changed your mind on the approach that the Democratic Party needs to the Trump presidency since, January 20th, 2025 to today? Like, how has your mind changed maybe about what is possible for the Democratic Party, what our voters want, what voters in Minnesota want? Has anything changed for you? Obviously, you have been a progressive your entire career. You jumped into this race with a Bernie Sanders backing. Like, has there been anything that's changed in your mind about maybe what Democrats can do or should do differently?
I would say that we were in the crosshairs, right, of all of Donald Trump's fury and angst and just explicit racism. And we stood up in whatever way we could, right? And so for some folks, that meant delivering meals. For others, it meant, driving kids who are not even your own kids to and from school. It meant marching in negative, 15 below zero weather with 9,000 other people to say that this is not okay. And so for me, we shouldn't take for granted the people are ready. They have been begging us to say the damn thing and to say, right, that we are not okay with the fact that, people are foregoing healthcare or going to the doctor because they know that they can't afford to pay their rent, or that we know that there are people who are going to be paying off student loans until the end of time because they got a raw deal that benefits big banks and not students themselves. And again, this is about, this is the 1 year anniversary of the, big, in quotes, beautiful bill, taking food off the table through SNAP cuts, ripping away healthcare from people on Medicaid, all in exchange for tax cuts for the ultra wealthy who do not need them, who are the folks who are trying to drive our politics, and influence what happens at the Supreme Court, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People are over it. And we can't nicey nice, our way through any of this. And if you are, if you're going to run for office, you better run for the people. That, I think, is the biggest thing that I have taken away through this campaign in its entirety. And the people are ready to step up and help. You just have to ask them.
And if they would like to step up and help your campaign, how can they do so?
Sure. They can go to peggyflanagan.com. Folks can sign up to volunteer, contribute. As we are the campaign of the many and not the money, but I'm, part of the many, and I believe in us.
I believe in your campaign as well. And I always appreciate you joining me today on Sunday.
Thanks so much, Jack.
Thank you. Always fantastic chatting with my good friend, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, who is running such an incredible race in Minnesota. Also, y'all might not have known this, but Minnesota has this Confederate flag from the Civil War that Virginia is always asking them to give back, and they're just like, no. I absolutely love that. Minnesota is always holding it down, and you learn new things about that incredible state every day. But speaking of learning new things, we have learned a lot of new things about just how terrible of an event that Donald Trump can put on with his great American state fair, that MAGA-fied disaster. And we learned them this week from our good friend, Jim Acosta, who I'm excited to chat with, and I hope you enjoy. Jim Acosta, thank you so much for joining me on Sunday.
Hey, you got it, Jack. Good to see you.
Well, you have been out, unfortunately for you, and we all appreciate your important work, but you've been out at Donald Trump's MAGA-fied state fair all week. Is the vibe on the ground actually as bad as it looks through all the videos that we've seen in all of your reporting?
Oh, the vibes are so bad. They're not good. I went down there on Monday, and I was thinking, okay, it's a few days before the the July 4th holiday. Maybe more people will show up. I've been looking at some of the clips, from Aaron Rupar and others on social media, and it's exactly the same as it was I saw on Monday. There are no lines. The exhibits that they have set up are pretty shoddy in terms of their construction. I mean, we found one area, one exhibit. It was in a pavilion hall where, like the faux columns are like a good 2 or 3 feet. They end 2 or 3 feet off the ground. I mean, it's just, and then there's the Timu Trump arch, which apparently is already starting to fall apart. But I mean, it had the same kind of shoddy look to it. And I mean, that's sort of the moral of the story, right? He's incompetent at everything except for his own corruption. Whether it's the Kennedy Center or the Reflecting Pool or now the State Fair.
Well, it's funny. This is coming at the same time as Donald Trump's financial disclosure has been released. And my favorite graph that I have seen this week is how much Trump has made off of his crypto ventures and how much his supporters have lost, right? It is the direct handoff. The benefit for Donald Trump is always the loss for his supporters. Like, he wants to throw himself a big party, and so he makes you stand out in the heat. Is it registering with anyone there, or are they just so deeply in the cult, or maybe thought that it would actually be enjoyable, but that they're just kind of pushing through?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, Jack, I mean, a lot of his supporters are watching Fox, they're watching conservative media, they're in the echo chamber, and they're not getting any kind of, they're not going to, the truth is not penetrating.
No.
But, I will tell you, you go back and you look at that financial disclosure form, it shows he's making hundreds of millions of dollars off these crypto schemes, and it's almost the same exact amount of money that his supporters, his cult followers are losing. It's astonishing. You would think you would see more of it, but down on the National Mall, I mean, there were, like I was saying earlier, there were exhibits for just about everything that was Trumpy under the sun. There was even a Fox News setup where they have sort of an outdoor studio overlooking the National Mall. And, I'm sure you've seen these segments where, they'll bring on the governor of Louisiana or whoever it is, and they'll come on and they'll say, look at these crowds, they're amazing. And then this is why I've been saying this week that the Fox camera people and the Fox control room people, they're my heroes of the week. Because the Fox camera guy is just like, hey, I'm just taking the shot here and it's empty. So, God bless that guy. And then the control room, it's almost right on cue. I don't know if it's the director or who's doing it, but they're, punch out camera one when they talk about the crowds, and they're just empty. And there's no putting lipstick on this pig. I mean, the crowds are not there. It's an embarrassment. And I think it's because, Jack, a lot of people, they went into this year thinking, okay, it's 2026, 250 years of America. This is great. July 4th, it's going to be amazing. And then the way Trump has made this all about himself, and it's so pathetically driven off, like, people like Milli Vanilli and Vanilla Ice, and he can't even get good entertainers down here. So he wants to give like this huge speech, Fidel Castro-like speech down on the National Mall. It's driven off just about anybody outside of MAGA who wants to take part in this.
Yeah, I want to get more into the Trump cultural of it all, but I want to stay with the
Yeah.
point that you made about Fox. Obviously, in your journalistic career, you've never
Yeah.
had to spin for an administration, but I'm sure
Right.
there's been times where you've been on the ground thinking that something was going to happen, and then it didn't exactly play out that way, and then you maybe had to kind of refigure your lead, or I don't know, had to get different shots. What do you think is happening in the Fox control rooms? Like, do you think the host, like, do you think any of, obviously they can't believe what they're saying. They're looking out and seeing nothing, but who is telling them to say this? What do you think is happening? Are they as panicked as we are, like, laughing?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much money they've spent putting this game day set. This is usually what you call them in cable news, game day sets, down on the mall. But I mean, I would have to think that, and this goes back to my days when I was at my old place and anchoring and reporting from the White House. When I would talk to my sources, they would tell me all the time that yes, Fox works hand in glove with the Trump White House. And one has to think that they are being pressured to make it seem as though everything is like this giant, Trump Woodstock down on the National Mall, when that's not the case. But even if you watch the anchors on Fox have been, carrying as water and saying things like, oh, well, it's really hot today, so that might explain why people aren't down here just yet, or they're just starting to arrive, or the festivities will be getting going. I mean, it's almost as though they have to do it to keep their jobs. And it's really sad and pathetic. I mean, when I was doing my thing, as you know, Jack, I just called them like I saw them. And there were times when Democrats would get pissed and Republicans you just don't worry about that stuff. You have to present things as they are. But what we're trying to do, what they're trying to do over at Fox, what MAGA's trying to do to their supporters, with this Great American State Fair, is they're trying to pull a George Orwell 1984 on people, where they're telling people not to believe their lying eyes, and it just doesn't work. People can just see with their own eyes that this thing is a bust.
And it's really especially kind of like, funny for them to be pushing it so hard, given that we know that they are tied in with the administration. They had to get the permits. It kind of makes me think back to the statue on Best Friends Day of Epstein and Trump that was taken away by the National Park Services. They were only able to set this up because of the administration, and Trump forcing himself upon us really is the reason that all of these things go so wrong. I've said 1,000 times, Trump saying we have Trump derangement syndrome. The real derangement is Trump thinking we want any part of him in our day-to-day lives. I have to think that maybe he's starting to pick up that nobody likes him, or he's bummed about it. Do you think that he's getting that sense at all?
I don't know. I mean, I think that, I think, yes, I think it's unmistakable at this point that he knows deep down the way he is going to be remembered after he leaves the presidency, that we're all going to find out. I mean, the financial disclosure form, it's 900 some odd pages, and it's pretty bad when you look at it on its surface. And that's what he's reported. Imagine how bad it really is.
Yeah.
And when historians look back at this, when journalists look back at this 10, 15 years from now, maybe even 5 years from now, they're going to see the most corrupt presidency in the history of the United States. They're going to see a president who unleashed ICE in a war on Latinos in this country that resulted in the killings of 2 American citizens in Minneapolis, the pardoning of January 6 criminals, a ridiculously awful economic policy that involved tariffs and, driving up gas prices. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so he knows that he's going to be ranked at the bottom of all presidents in American history. And so that's why he's going around and trying to build an arch and trying to expand the footprint of the White House with a ridiculous ballroom and do these vanity projects. But the vanity projects, as I was saying earlier, they highlight I think the ultimate truism in Trumpism, and that is it is corruption without competence. The old DC license plate used to be taxation without representation. I think it should be corruption without competence.
And it's also fake too. Like, it's observably fake. All the columns at the fair, you said the kind of the Timu arch, like, it is all fake. And it's really funny, kind of this lasting stench of Trump, given where we were and November of 2024, where MAGA had declared themselves this kind of cultural victory. Trump was supposedly cool. We were going to be a conservative country, and that's just the way it was. And now you flash forward, and not only is Trump so unpopular, but his movement, Tucker Carlson says, I'm not voting for Republicans, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Of course, they've got their own thing going on. How long do you think it sticks with the party? Like, do you think this sticks with the party, the stench of Trump?
I mean, I think it does. After Herbert Hoover and his presidency, I mean, it took a generation for Republicans to get back in the White House, and it came in the form of General Dwight David Eisenhower, which I guess Trump just realized he was a general. I don't know if you saw this speech that he gave.
He was a great guy. People don't know that.
He doesn't know he's a general. It's sort of like when Trump says that people don't realize that dumb ends with a B. I think if you're the one who's saying that you didn't think people realize that dumb ends with a B, you might be the dumb person. But anyway, no, I mean, I think that is exactly what's happening right now, Jack, is you have people running in terror away from Donald Trump right now, like he's Godzilla. And it is going to wreak havoc on the Republican Party for years to come. I mean, I was writing about this in my Substack just today, that the Republicans in Congress, they had an opportunity to at least have some oversight over Trump's greed and corruption and his grift, and they refused to do it. Mm-hmm. They were basically on board with his weaponization fund. I mean, it ultimately did not come to pass. The fact that he gets a get out of jail and get out of audit free card as a result of that whole rotten deal. I mean, these are things that the Republicans, they could have slammed the brakes on, and they didn't. And so they own this, and it's historically going to be an albatross around their necks, I think, for years to come. The question becomes, what do Democrats do with this opportunity? And there's been a lot of like circular firing squad activity that I've seen where it's sort of like, well, because this one candidate over here is a little too far left, that means the whole thing is going down the tubes. The Republicans under Donald Trump, MAGA under Donald Trump, they have not behaved in that fashion. They tolerated the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene because they had a bigger prize in mind, and that was having permanent majorities, large majorities in the House and the Senate and at the Supreme Court and over in the White House, of course. And I think Democrats are probably going to have to adopt some of that kind of ruthlessness if they're totally going to drive Republicans from the scene for years to come. I mean, if you look at the Supreme Court just this past week, the way they ruled on birthright citizenship, I mean, this is in the Constitution, and it almost got overturned. It was 6-3 technically, but really it was like 5.5 to 4.5 because of Brett Kavanaugh not being sold on the idea that it's in the Constitution. It's in the Constitution. I don't know what Brett Kavanaugh is smoking. And so it's a determined far right project that the Republican Party has been embarking on for the last generation. I mean, and so, Jack, I think Democrats are going to have to sort of adopt that same kind of mentality if they want a progressive reformist era to take hold for the next 10 to 15 years. Otherwise, it's just going to ping pong back and forth between, MAGA and the Democratic Party when they get their stuff together every 8 years or so.
I think ruthlessness is the word. We had Gavin Newsom on, Governor, earlier in the show, and it was last week when he was on a podcast with our friend Brian Tyler Cohen talking about how he's loosening up on Supreme Court reform, while he's talking about a national billionaires tax. A lot of people who kind of loved and said we got to return the institutions to where they are now on board with the institutions are broken and nobody likes them. So how about we start to remake them? Rather than just letting Donald Trump rip them down. But you talk about the Republicans who will inherit the weight of Trump. There's one who's clearly really worried about it, and it's J.D. Vance. It's interesting that he hasn't been at any of these events that Sean Duffy introduced Donald Trump at his little speech. And instead of Vance, he's tried to distance himself from the war on Iran, the Epstein files, everything under the sun. Where do you see J.D. Vance just standing in MAGA right now?
Yeah, I mean, Trump is really pissed at J.D. Vance. I mean, that much is clear. I think it was after that press conference when he was in over at the G7 where he said, well, if this doesn't go well, I'm going to blame J.D. Vance, I think is what he said.
Which is just what we should all do in our lives. Just like, it's J.D.'s fault.
And these are the things that get written off by, if you ask the Trump White House, they'll be, oh, he's just kidding. He's just joking. I've covered Donald Trump for a long time. He's not joking when he says that. He absolutely means it. And I think it is because of the reasons that you stated. JD Vance, I mean, it sounds as though he's leaking out elements that are showing up in Maggie Haberman's book, showing up in the New York Times. I was the one who was against the Iran war. I was really, speaking out against it and so on. When those kinds of things pop up in the press, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out whose office these leaks are coming from. And, it seems to me JD Vance is trying to preserve his political future while at the same time embracing the Titanic. And that's just not going to fly. And on top of that, I mean, to some extent, I think Trump is a game recognizes game kind of guy. And when he sees things like JD Vance touching Usha on the knee and saying, "Oh, hey, good to see you. Good to see you, hon." That whole embarrassing thing that they put out the other day.
Yes.
I mean, I think Trump looks at that and is like, why the hell did I pick this guy?
I think that's such a perfect description of him. And it makes so much sense for why he loves Zohran Mamdani so much. Yeah. When was the last time Donald Trump was confronted with a real person in the White House? Someone who wasn't just going to kiss his ass. It never happens.
Maybe Pelosi in the first term, something like that. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And then it kind of makes me go back to your scuffle with him. Like, you've been close enough for Donald Trump to, I hate for the visual for everyone, but to spit at you yelling in anger. And he still, of course, yells at the press and picks on particularly women. But his strength, not that it was ever really there, is certainly diluted. We will get put on a list if we have this conversation. So let's have this conversation.
Sure.
What do you think is going on with the man's health?
I mean, I think that he's obviously not the same person that I covered during the first term. I don't remember him falling asleep in the cabinet meetings and in the Oval Office as people are standing over his shoulder talking. I mean, that's totally nuts. And the fact that it's not really talked about in the mainstream press all that much is an embarrassment. I mean, I think that my friends in corporate media, they need to get a little bit more courage. They need to summon a little more courage in this moment right now. We can report on the things that are apparent to our own eyes. Like, that's okay to do. You're not going to get in trouble, and the American people expect it of you. And I just, but I think, the bruises, the cankles, I mean, there's lots of physical signs. I think that the incoherence, though, to me, is the overriding theme here. When he keeps bragging about acing cognitive tests, when he talks about, people don't realize that Eisenhower was a general. I mean, he's saying things that just, if Joe Biden were saying these things, they would go nuts. Joe Biden had to abandon his presidential run in 2020 or in 2024 because he said we killed Medicare. And Donald Trump has one of those moments almost every day where just something gets blurted out of his mouth that doesn't make any sense. Joe Biden's entire political career ended off of one of those comments, and Donald Trump does it. It's like a regular occurrence over at the White House. You get your popcorn out, you pop your popcorn, you get it out every day around 3 or 4 o'clock. He gets in the Oval Office or stands in front of reporters and says something that literally makes no sense.
And then falls asleep.
And then he passes out and falls asleep.
He revs himself up to it, and he says some bullshit, and then he tuckers out. Yeah.
If Joe Biden had done just a fraction of those things, he wouldn't have made it to the end of his term. They
talked about his shoes constantly. It's that he was wearing sneakers was the biggest problem.
Yes, or he fell off his bike, or if he stumbled going up the steps. And Trump he's passed out almost every other day in front of the cameras. And I covered him during the first term. He had a lot of executive time back then. That is nothing compared to what we're seeing now. He's barely out in front of the cameras. I think that, as I was saying earlier, the press needs to cover this war. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Trump is the one who came up with Sleepy Joe and all of those things. That standard naturally should be applied to him, and there shouldn't be any worry at all on the part of the press. Fuck the mergers and acquisitions fear. Like, you guys have to get over that stuff and just cover what we're seeing.
What's the detail about his health that you wish would get more coverage? Is it the sleep? Is it the bruises? Is it the speech? Is it the national security implications? Because those are certainly there.
Yeah, no, I think the national security implications are probably the most important part. And, it makes you wonder, are we, and these are the questions that MAGA would bring up and Fox would bring up during the Biden presidency. Who's really pulling the strings during the Biden presidency? If he's this far out to lunch and he's Sleepy Joe, there must be somebody. It must be Obama. It must be Susan Rice. It must be all of these people behind the scenes. what's going on with Donald Trump. I would like to know who it is that's in the room with him on a regular basis when he's making a lot of these decisions, in particular national security decisions. We shouldn't have to find those things out when Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan put a book out. It should be a little bit more readily available than that. And part of this is not really the press's fault. Part of this is because this time around, this Trump White House, it is much more insular. It is much more closed off to the press. They have, and the way they have structured things with the White House press corps, where they get to pick and choose who gets to be in the press pool every day and who gets to sit where in the briefing room. I mean, they have really slammed the lid shut on press coverage in this administration. This is, they lie and they say they're the most transparent administration ever. Nothing could be further from the truth. But the news organizations have to be much more vigilant and a lot more tougher on the White House. And if you're not going to, if they're going to do this kind of crazy business with the press pool, somebody should take them to court. I mean, these things should be challenged. It shouldn't just be accepted as the new reality.
Yeah. And we started this conversation talking about Donald Trump's latest vanity project. This is where I want to close, especially on the note of what the press should be covering. Someone made a great comment this week. I wish I remember who it was, which they said that Donald Trump is much closer to a first lady right now than he is a president. No shade to our great first ladies, and that his focus is on design and renovations and so on and such. There have been a lot of ideas floated about what to do with, whatever is made of the ballroom, whatever happens with the reflecting pool. He's working on a golf course right now. What would you like to see happen if you had total control of the Trump monuments and the vanity projects starting January 20th, 2029?
Absolutely, 100%. All of those things should be torn down. And if the ballroom is under construction, the construction should stop. And you should bring in a panel of experts to look at, how this thing could be retrofitted so it doesn't look like an eyesore and an embarrassment. And if that can't happen, then you tear the whole thing down and you start all over again. Jack, I remember when I covered the second Obama administration and they had people jumping the fence. You might remember this. There were, deranged people from
running up to the front door.
They jumped, and there was that one guy who ran in the front door and everything, and they had to raise the height of the fence. And I remember thinking back in those days, I could hop that fence. Like, that's not a big thing to do. And I was a guy in my 40s. But they had to get a panel of experts. They had the National Park Service. They had all of these different government types who got together and decided just how high the fence should go, what the fence should look like, how long should it take. They put out the bidding for the contracts and so on. That's how you properly do things in a constitutional democracy and a democratic republic. And what Trump does is he just decides, I'm going to give it to this buddy over there or that donor over there, even if they don't have the experience that's needed for the project. We're just going to do it that way. So my sense of it is, Jack, is that everything should be restored to the way things were before he started doing these things. And it's obvious why he's doing these things. He's doing these things because he knows deep down in his bones that he is going to be ranked probably the lowest among all presidents in American history. And so he wants to be remembered now. He wants to be remembered now before he leaves the scene. And he wants to see tangible signs of that. He thinks it'll give him some peace before he leaves this world. And you talk about things that give you pause about his health. I have more pause about his mental health than his physical health. That's what concerns me greatly. And this is like end days of Saddam Hussein that we're seeing right now with the way he's trying to build things and take over projects down in Washington, D.C. It does not speak to somebody who is at all healthy when it comes to what's happening up here.
And like I said, that's gonna get us both put on a list. So I appreciate you saying that, and if other people appreciate you saying that and want to, of course, follow your great work, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me, the Jim Acosta Show. We're live just about every day on Substack. We air later on YouTube and sometimes X and Apple Podcasts and all those great places. I mean, just the other day, we did like 12 hours of coverage outside the Kennedy Center. So we're growing and growing and growing. And so any support that folks can give us in supporting independent media and folks like yourself, Jack, you've been doing a great job too. I'm very thankful for it every day.
I appreciate it. Independent media, more important than ever. Jim Acosta, thank you so much for joining me on Sunday.
You got it, Jack. Thank you.
Always great hanging out and chatting with my good friend Jim Acosta. Now, before we go, it is time for the Idiot of the Week. And this week, it's not just one person, but an entire category of people, because this week's Idiot of the Week is the MAGA piggy bank. Now, that's any of these weirdo Trump supporters who are not only all in, but can't wait to give more while being scammed directly to their faces. Let's talk about the actual size of Donald Trump's grift for a second, because a new report dropped this week, and the numbers are almost too obscene to say out loud. Nearly 1 million people, that is 988,905 wallets, have collectively lost $3.8 billion trading Donald Trump's scam meme coin, a coin that almost immediately lost 97% of its value. And where did that money go? It went to Donald Trump. What a surprise. He personally profited more than $600 million off of the coin, part of $2.2 billion he made off this quote-unquote business last year. Now, the way it works, Donald Trump's scam coin, is that Trump takes a very substantial cut on every single trade of his coin, whether the cost goes up or it goes down. Meaning, the only way for this scheme to work is for people to keep buying and selling a fake coin while he skims off the top like a literal mob boss. And you would think that losing your life savings to a rotting pedo scammer would be a wake-up call, but for these people, the MAGA piggy bank, it's just not. They just line up and say, "Oh, please, sir, may I have some more? Please, sir, take my retirement fund too." They get robbed, and then they defend the robber, and they go back for seconds because they don't know anything else. They just don't. They don't care about policy or politics. They care about hating someone else, whether it's immigrants, Democrats, women, trans people, take your pick. And once your whole identity is stapled to hating your neighbor instead of just being a decent person, you can't afford to admit that the basis of your identity is a fraud, because then you'd have to admit you built your whole life around nothing. So instead, they double down. Heat stroke, waiting for Donald Trump's Ferris wheel at the failed MAGA state fair, double down. Crypto, wiped out your life savings, double down. Lost their federal job, oh, you better believe you're going to double down. Paying more for eggs and gas than they ever did under the guy that they hate, you gotta double down. Every single time. It is never Donald Trump's fault to them. It's the Democrats. Oh, sorry, the Democrats. These are the same people who spent 4 straight years losing their minds over a laptop, screaming about the Biden family, the corruption, and the self-dealing. And now we have a sitting president who is nakedly, publicly, on the record, pumping his own coin and profiting off of stock trades in the single most blatant insider trading grifting in American history in broad daylight. And the response is, good, he deserves it. He's a real smart guy. So this week's Idiot of the Week, it's you, MAGA. It is all of you. You are being robbed by a man who has never once cared whether you literally live or die. Have a little cash in the bank or go broke. It does not matter to Donald Trump. Remember, this man kicked you off of your health care, and you've still got more money to give him. It is embarrassing the way that you always come back and you always say thank you. MAGA, you are the Idiot of the Week. And it is always going to be that way. So we will continue to call them out on this show. And I want to say a quick thank you to my 3 guests who did exactly that with me. Governor Gavin Newsom, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, who of course has that important Senate race coming up. So please make sure you are supporting her as well. And of course, my friend Jim Acosta, who is out in the field, out at Donald Trump's disastrous state fair. So do support Jim in whatever way you can, because independent media matters so much right now. And that is why the last thank you, as always, is to the guys who helped me make this happen. My friends at MeidasTouch, Brett, Ben, Jordy, you guys are fantastic. This platform, this Meidas Mighty family is the reason that On Sunday has been such a smash hit. So I want to say thank you to you all. We are going to continue to grow this thing. We are going to continue to have great guests. I'm very excited for next week, so you're going to want to stick around. And as always, you are going to want to stick around. When? The time that I'm going to be seeing you, you're going to be seeing me. We're going to be having great guests. And that is every week. It's the weekend. And it's always on Sunday.